this. Today we're going to look at and try to understand the whole dynamics of emotional and behavioral disorders. And I purposely talk about them in different because not all kids with that act inappropriate in the classroom have an emotional disturbance. Because so we are going to talk about emotions and then we'll talk about behaviors and how that all plays out. So emotional and behavioral disorders are it's a very interesting grouping of disabilities. It is these kids have the worst outcomes of all students of special education, with the exception of the very significantly impaired, intellectually impaired. These kids have like a completion rate in high school of around 50%. That's terrible. And but then we have learning disabilities, about 80%. Emotional behavior disorders, it tends to be about 50%. Most often they're in the most restricted environments, like discipline ADPs or behavior classrooms, etc. So they're isolated much more than most kids with disabilities. And for the most part, it's because teachers don't understand behavior and how to work with kids with these significantly problematic behaviors. So we're going to try to demystify this disability somewhat today. We talk about behavior issues. So that's the first thing is we're going to define what the IDEA says about emotional disturbance. This is the category is emotional disturbance. Now, to define a student with an emotional disturbance, it must include a psychologist or a licensed specialist in school psychology. So they're going to be doing the assessment of these kids. They'll be doing their whatever testing that they do with this kid. So here is the definition of the term emotional behavior disorder. So I'll read through it real quick, and then I want to have you guys talk with your appropriate social distancing folk about these different pieces. So this is a disability. It's used in the definition of a child with a disability as defined below. Emotional disturbance means a condition exhibiting one or more of the following characteristics. So it doesn't have to have all five. It can have one or more of these characteristics. Okay? So that's important to think about. So let's walk through these. One or more of the following characteristics over a long period of time and to a marked degree that adversely affects a child's educational performance. See, there's that phrase again. Adversely affects a child's educational performance. And we've talked about educational performance. Does that mean only academics? So it could be socially, emotionally, behaviorally, physically, safety, etc., on and on and on and on, right? Okay. So these are the five characteristics, and it can be one or more of these. A is an inability to learn that cannot be explained by intellectual, sensory, or health factors. So you've got to rule out that a health problem is causing them not to learn, not to be educated appropriately. You've got to make sure they have not a intellectual disability, below 70 IQ, and they don't have any problems with their vision or hearing. Okay, so you have to rule those out. Also, this one is saying that if they have a learning disability, you cannot, and they're not learning appropriately. This one, if that's the only characteristic they have, and they don't demonstrate any of these others, you can't say that they're emotionally disturbed. You have to have an additional characteristic to get to that. Because if you have a learning disability, you can have a learning disability and an emotional disability. So they can be comorbid. Okay. So that's A. B is an inability to build or maintain satisfactory interpersonal relationships with peers and teachers. So that's an interesting one. So it's not or, it means and. So in other words, does this mean that they have an inability to build or maintain relationships at all? See what I'm saying? It is peers and teachers. So they might be able to build a relationship with adults, but they're having difficulties with their peers. Then that's not emotional disturbance. That's a social maladjustment. So we need to look at that more thoroughly. So it has to be pervasive, not just peers or teachers. See what I mean? I'm making sure I'm not muted. I've been muted before. I'm not muted. Okay. All right. C, inappropriate types of behavior or feelings in normal circumstances. And we're going to talk about those more thoroughly in a bit. D, a general pervasive mood of unhappiness and depression. So that's D. Or E, a tendency to develop physical symptoms or fears associated with personal or school problems. So that's an or. And then the second part of this, there's an exclusion. Emotional disturbance includes schizophrenia, which is a very rare occurrence for children. Most often schizophrenia becomes evident around early 20s to mid 20s in individuals, not in children. The term does not apply to children who are socially maladjusted. We'll define that. It's like nailing jello to the wall to define that social maladjustment. We'll try to do that, unless it is determined that they have an emotional disturbance in the paragraph. Okay. So, talk at your tables for a minute about these 5 pieces. Are they clear, or is it clear as mud? It really is hard. So talk about that and talk with your neighbor and say, ask, share what you think about this definition. Okay, you got 2 minutes. 15 seconds and we'll share out. It's early in the morning. So, what do you guys think? Is this pretty clear, or do you think you need a lot more information to understand this? A lot more information? Like what's inappropriate types of behaviors and those kind of things? How do we define that? This has been a very controversial category. The people in the field of emotional behavior disorders, psychologists, behavior specialists, they don't like this exclusion down here about social maladjustment. I personally believe that you can be very specific between emotional disorders and behavioral disorders, and one is skills requisite, one is emotional requisite. But this is where we live in this field that has a lot of different beliefs. Okay, so we're going to kind of, so you know, we follow the RTI process for emotional behavior disorders. Actually, RTI, the response to intervention three-tiered system, actually came out of the literature for behavior emotions. And this took this on before we did with learning disabilities. And it's very similar to what we do. Tier 1 is universal school-wide systems. Tier 2 is small group, classroom-wide systems. And Tier 3 is targeted individual systems. And then we try to work with the kids. And when they get they don't respond appropriately to those strategies in Tier 3, then we refer on for a full individual evaluation, RTI for learning. So that's an important thing. But this is a three-tier model of positive behavioral supports. So the full individual evaluation must include a statement of emotional disturbance. What if the parents brought a psychological, or what happens if a parent brings in an outside assessment? What do you think we need to do? So we're going to talk about that. So statement of emotional disturbance, it has to give which of the 5 characteristics are multiple of those characteristics does the child demonstrate, and what's those effects on their educational learning in the classrooms, their educational needs. So let's look at bullet 2. What do you think we need to do if a parent brings in a psychological or an outside evaluation? What do you think we need to do? This is so you can know for the future in the classroom. If a parent brings an outside evaluation, the school district has only one obligation, and that is to review the evaluation and determine if it's an appropriate evaluation or not, and to see if they can utilize any of that information. If they don't have to use the information, they just have to review the outside evaluation. And most often what school districts do is they take their outside evaluation and then they conduct their own evaluation. And because a lot of times parents have brought in a very poor report, a poor evaluation. So we just want to make sure it's appropriate. You don't have to make any recommendations from that evaluation to the IEP unless you agree with the report. So that's an important part. All right, so we're going to look at each of these element characteristics closer. So before we get to the 5 characteristics, let's kind of take apart that the front part. Okay, one or more of the conditions are exhibited for a long period of time. So let's kind of define what we think a long period of time might be. What do you think a long period of time is? What's a long period of time for you as a early adults, young adults? A couple years? Okay. And it could be, but the thing is, kids is a long period of time for a kid the same as for you, because they have less of life experience, right? So a long period of time can be a shorter period of time than years. So we need to be thinking differently. Psychologists have a tendency to use like 6 months as a rule of thumb. If we've seen this behavior for 6 months, then that's a long period of time. They've been experiencing general mood of depression and withdrawing behavior for 6 months. That's a long period of time. So we kind of look at that. So for kids, it's shorter than what it is for an adult because of life experiences. So we kind of look at that. What about the term marked degree? What are we aligning this degree of behavior to? So we have a thought, or we have to infer something, correct? What do you think that we're saying this child's behavior is inappropriate to a marked degree? So what are we judging it with? What do you think? How do you know one of your friends is acting inappropriate? You have a standard that you kind of think that they should follow what their behavior is. You've got some friends that are probably really hyperactive, some friends that are really quiet, and your hyperactive friend that might be acting really quiet one day, something's wrong, right? Okay. So you have a standard of that individual, but also you need to look at the standard of their peer group. Now, is it their peer group at home or their peer group at school? So let's take kids. Let's take kids, for example, from low socioeconomic urban population, and very likely there's a lot of gang activity and stuff like that. And what we do know about gang personalities, gangs, is that they tend to glorify violence. They have a tendency to put women down as objects rather than being seen as authority figures. And so there's some conflict going on there. We have what gender is most represented in teaching? Males, females. And so there could be an issue with gender and seeing the teacher not as an authority figure. And so we have to look outside and see, not in the school. Sometimes kids don't know how to behave in the classroom. You're going to teach them. They need to learn to be social chameleons. You guys social chameleons? You know what kind of behaviors to exhibit, let's say, if you're talking to the president of the university, or if you're talking to your friends on the party night, right? So sometimes kids aren't able to make that switch to a inappropriate behaviors to talk to an authority figure or their friends. So we need to kind of see, is that marked degree in more than one setting, at school and at home? And if it's not different at home, that's not emotional disturbance according to this. You know what I'm saying? So it's important that we think that this is a deficit piece that we kind of look at. If their behavior is inappropriate in the classroom, we need to define, is it emotionally driven or is it a skills deficit? If it's a skills deficit, then we need to teach them how to behave better, right? They don't know, so we just need to teach them. So we need to do that. So is this displayed in multiple settings? If not, why not? So we need to kind of figure that out. What's working to make them behave more appropriate at home than at school? You don't know. You've got to figure that out. It's there. Then adversely affects their educational performance. And this could be socially, emotionally, behaviorally, and so on and on. So an inability to learn, it's got to be distinguished from an inability or unwillingness to learn or to engage. So when we look at this, are they struggling there? If it's not one, this needs to apply. Some kids that are in low socioeconomic groups, they don't want to learn, even though learning might become easy for them, because it might be their peers might think they are trying to be something that they're not. So we need to make sure that it's either it's the ability, not an unwillingness. But if it's an unwillingness, we need to know why. That's still one thing. Inability to build or maintain satisfactory relationships with peers and teachers. But then we need to identify who's saying that it's not satisfactory. Is it the parents? Is it the school? If the child's happy with their relationship, that's one thing. What about we need to be able to differentiate between inability to lack of interest? Are they happy with only one or two friends? Or I used to watch the Big Bang Theory, and Sheldon always cut me up big time. Now it's probably I don't know how I'm talking about. But Sheldon's circle of friends, he only had he would say he could only have this many friends. If he's going to have a new friend, then somebody has to leave the circle of friends. And so that was kind of an interesting thing. However, he was well on the spectrum, autism spectrum. But we need to be able to distinguish this. This is where the psychological evaluations come into play. Inappropriate types of behaviors under normal circumstances. What do you think that might be? Say, for example, a student is working on something, and a normal circumstance, they become frustrated, and a normal frustration would say, oh, darn, I can't get this. I need to talk to the teacher to see if I can get some extra help. But Billy over here, when he gets challenged by something, he screams out, tears up his paper, and runs out of the classroom. Is that appropriate behavior? So I know that's way extreme, but you might have a kid that pushes himself back to the table and uses it. That's a makes sense. So we need to differentiate what that means. Try to understand that. Okay. A general pervasive mood of unhappiness and depression. Let's talk about this for a second. How do you know when your friends are depressed, or somebody's depressed? class. What is the telltale sign? They're withdrawn. Okay? So they're isolating themselves from their peers. What's other things that you might know or figure out that they're depressed? Hygiene might be one. They could have they not taking care of themselves. They got with masks on, some things can be difficult because you're not seeing their whole facial expression, right? So, but you might be able to tell by their demeanor, their face might be how their countenance might be drawn, might look sad, like feel, their energy level might be low. Those. So let's talk about that for a second because here's an interesting thing. We have boys and we have girls, and boys and girls have different kinds of behavior. Boys let's put a check. Are boys externalizing kind of people or are they internalizing? They're externalizing. So we're going to put externalizing. And girls, they tend to be, you guys tend to be more introspective. You tend to be less act out, correct? I'm not being, this is the research. So internalize. So let's talk about that. How does a girl shows withdrawn, isolated behavior by being quiet, not engaging with others, isolate? So how does a boy do those demonstrate not wanting to be with other people? They're externalized. You might get into, you might argue and cause the people to get away. They might have some kind of fight or something, but it does the exact same thing as that. See what I'm saying? It isolates the boys from their friends. So here's the takeaway for you guys. In the classroom, you're going to see boys and girls that might have a general place of food of happiness, but their topography, that means what the behavior looks like, are going to be different, but the purpose of the behavior is exactly the same. So boys primarily will make people mad at them so they can isolate. Girls, they'll just be quiet and withdraw. Now, think about this. Which of the two are you as the teacher going to focus on? The one where the kids yelling and screaming and fighting with others, or the one that's not causing a problem but isolating? A, right? First, because the squeaky wheel gets the grease, right? So that's an important thing. We tend to ignore the one that's not causing any problems, but they could be more significantly depressed than the boy. So we tend to ignore them. That's why boys are exceptionally highly powerful. More often, boys are identified with emotional behavior disorders than girls. This is one of the reasons. to be more aware. So I charge you guys to be more aware of that. So isn't that interesting? Very interesting. Okay, then the tendency to develop physical symptoms or fears, not just you have a test that day and you get a stomach ache, right? I think we've all done that. Have you ever done the thing where your mom can't do it anymore with a non-touch thermometers, where you would put the thermometer by the light bulb to make the temperature higher so you wouldn't have to get something. I'm telling you. You can't do that anymore. LED lights, they don't put up the heat, number one. And number two, we have this non-touch thermometers now. You can't get away with that. You don't want to have temperature because then you'd be isolated. Right? So, but this is the thing that we need to look at this and see. It's not just ever so often, it's pervasive. It means it happens over a long period of time, more than one time. They have all those fears. It might be associated with bullying in school and things like that, but it's very interesting. So, okay, and now we move into the exclusionary piece. Is this term emotional disturbance includes schizophrenia? I mentioned schizophrenia is rare in children. It does not apply to children who are not socially maladjusted. So that's where we have to look at the whole skills deficit. And performance deficit thing. The difference is that a skills deficit means they don't have the skill necessary to do the appropriate behaviors. Whereas if that's what skills deficit means, what do you think a performance deficit means? Do they have the skills? Yes, they're just choosing not to engage in the skill. So that might be, that's one question we ask. If it's a performance deficit, we need to understand why they're choosing not to engage appropriately. And that could be emotional disturbance. The skills deficit is just one that they just need to be taught the skill. And we do the same thing that we do with any other skill, like addition and subtraction. We teach the skill, we practice the skill, we independent practice the skill, then we assess if they know how to do it. And if they didn't do it in the assessment, then we reteach the skill, the lesson set. So that's important for us to think through. Behavior, remember, I'll give you a truth. All behavior is learned. That's true. So if we haven't been taught, we learned it through modeling. So we've learned these behaviors. We'll talk about those pieces, those foundational pieces in a minute. And as math, let's say learning to read, is it a behavior? Yes. Learning to read is a behavior. Learning to do math is behavior. Learning calculus is behavior. So these are all things that we learn and we do. So here's the thing about schizophrenia. Very often we think there's a mythology about schizophrenia that everybody has hallucinations. Not always. The bigger one is delusions. They think that they're, most often it's a spiritual delusion, like they think they're Jesus Christ or something like that. But delusion, they believe that the television is controlling them. they believe that people that have tons of conspiracy theories, they tend to be delusional. Hallucinations can occur, but not always do. They tend to be very disorganized in their speech. They tend to be very disorganized in their behaviors, or they have catatonic behaviors. This one, I did a lot of research on some things. Catatonic behaviors always kind of was interesting. There's this story of this woman that her catatonic behavior was to sweep in a circle with a broom. And she was at a psychiatric hospital, and she had been there for so long that she swept the tile away in a circle where she had to be in that one spot. She would stand and sweep all day long. Now, that was catatonic. It's not just being a frozen statue, but it's something that is, they can't get rid of that behavior. They tend to have a very flat affect and have some nervous symptoms. This is the minor stuff of the characteristics of schizophrenia. You have to go back into the DSM-4, and the only way to truly work with schizophrenia patients is they need to be properly medicated. The medication has its own side effects. It becomes very interesting. All right. Any questions on the definition of emotional behavior disorder? Or was that very interesting? For your test for this module, I'll ask you to questions over the 5 characteristics. So probably a long period of time, long period, those kind of things. Okay. All right, so now then, let's move on to some foundational concepts of behavior. These are the foundation stones of all behaviors. So we're going to take a look at each of these foundation stones here and take them apart. So all behaviors are learned. So let's take a look at a YouTube video. Sorry, this one's not doing like I thought. Okay, we're not going to watch this. Okay. Rather than watch that one, we'll watch the second one here in a second. But all behavior are learned through a process of reinforcement and punishment. Okay? So all behaviors are learned together. So before we get to the whole concept, we have reinforcement. We have punishment. So let's define what reinforcement is. What does reinforcement mean to you guys? I'm sorry? It encourages a behavior, okay? So reinforcement, let's use increases a behavior. That's what reinforcement does. What does punishment? What's the intent of punishment? Decrease. Punishment is decrease. Okay? Now, there are two types of reinforcement and two types of punishment. You have positive reinforcement. And what does positive mean? We have a tendency to put emotion to these words. I want you to take emotion out of positive. Positive only means to apply. Okay? That's what this term means. To apply. So we have positive reinforcement. We also have to think of negative reinforcement. Okay? Positive means to apply. What is negative? To remove. Okay? So, positive reinforcement is to apply something to increase a behavior. Negative reinforcement means what? To remove something to what? Let's say it together. Positive reinforcement means to apply something to increase behavior, correct? Okay. Negative reinforcement is to remove something to increase a behavior, correct? Okay, so here, let's think about it. We have the tendency to say that negative reinforcement is punishment. Is it? No. Not at all. It's removing something to increase a behavior. For example, you guys were teenagers at one time. Did your mom ever gripe at you to clean up your room? So they would gripe at you, gripe at you, gripe at you. If you went and cleaned up your room, what happened? She stopped griping. So what happened? That's a negative reinforcement. To get her to shut her mouth, I'm going to go clean my room. Negative reinforcement, right? Your alarm clock is a negative reinforcement. It goes off. It does what? It gets you out of bed. You know. To turn it off is actually increases turning off, but it gets you up out of bed. You remove that to increase the behavior. Then we put it into a Skinner thing. Skinner is the king of behavior, applied behavior analysis. You have different cages for mice. One cage had a mouse and it had a feeder, and it was doing positive reinforcement. And what it would do, the feeder, if you touch the lever, you would get a piece of fruit. Every time you touch the lever, you get a piece of fruit. See, positive reinforcement increases the touching the lever behavior, correct? Now then, there's another cage. There's a mouse in that cage, but the difference is there's a lever, but it doesn't give food. The of the cage has a mild electric shock, so there's an aversive environment. If he touches the lever, it removes the mild electric shock on the bottom of the cage. You remove it, increases lever pushing behavior. You see that? So that's negative reinforcement. And it's not punishment. So let's get to punishment. Punishment is meant to decrease the behavior. And guess what? You got two types of punishment also. You got positive punishment. And that's to apply. And then you've got negative punishment to remove. See how we take away the emotions from these words because we think positive means good, negative means bad. That's kind of where we get this stuff. But that's not it. It just means to add or subtract. Positive punishment is like a parent spanking their child. They apply the hand to the butt to stop the behavior, correct? That's positive punishment. Negative punishment is to remove something. What I did with my kids, instead of putting them on timeout, if they have an argument, I would put the item that they were having the argument on time. So if there's a TV, the TV was on timeout. It removed something to decrease the arguing behavior. So do you see the differences between this? So all behaviors are learned through a process of reinforcement and punishment. Makes sense? And you can probably see that. If you did get a bad grade, you do an assignment, you just kind of throw it together the night before it was due, you got a D or something on that assignment. Is that negative reinforcement or positive punishment? Your next assignment, you're going to do what? Get it done earlier and to get a better grade. So it's negative reinforcement, see? It's not a punishment. So that's the thing about all behaviors are learned. So let's look at another video. Let's see this one. And it has sound on it. That's okay. I don't want that. Okay. Sorry, guys. I didn't. I'll do this one.
Are you finished?
Thank you. How thoughtful. Would you like a chocolate?
Yeah, sure. Thanks. Oh, sorry, Sheldon, I almost sat in your spot.
Did you? I didn't notice. Have a chocolate.
Thank you.
You're here a lot now.
Oh, am I talking too much? I'm sorry.
Thank you. Chocolate?
Yes, please. Oh, hey, Kim. Yeah. You know what? Hold on. Let me take this in the hall. Do remember yesterday?
Okay. I know what you're doing. Really? Yes. You're using chocolates as positive reinforcement for what you consider correct behavior. Very good. Sheldon, you can't train my girlfriend like a lab rat. Actually, it turns out I can. Well, you shouldn't. There's just no pleasing you, is there, Leonard? You weren't happy with my previous approach to dealing with her, so I decided to employ operant conditioning techniques, building on the works of Thorndike and B.F. Skinner. Yet by this time next week, I believe I can have her jumping out of a pool, balancing a beach ball on her nose. No, this has to stop now. I'm not suggesting we really make her jump out of a pool. I thought the bazinga was implied. I'm just tweaking her personality. It's sanding off the rough edges, if you will. No, you're not sanding Penny. Are you saying that I am forbidden from applying a harmless, scientifically valid protocol that will make our lives better? Yes, you're forbidden. Bad Leonard. You know.
So, he was using positive reinforcement. What was the water bottle? That was a positive punishment. You see the difference? And that was an adversity, which we don't do. The bad Leonard, what should have been appropriate, that would have been positive. That was positive punishment. So you saw that. We have a tendency to think that's negative reinforcement. It's not. It's positive punishment. To reduce that. So that's an interesting. All right, so we've talked about all behavior is learned. I'm not going to get through all this today. The next one is that all behavior serve a function. So every single behavior that we engage in has a purpose. And so to truly understand why a child is engaging in the behavior, we need to understand what the purpose of that behavior is. All behaviors have a function. All behaviors, some purpose. It's either, and it's one or two things. It's either to get something or it's to escape something. So every behavior that we engage in, it's to do one or two things. Get or escape. Let me see if I've got these on these to work. Uh-oh.
It's not that easy, but Grammarly can help. This sentence is grammatically correct, but it's wordy and hard to read.
I don't know why I avoided the Harry Potter. Books for so long is great. Just started over 6.
That's a good one. Dumbledore dies in that one. Yeah, I know. I didn't see it coming either.
Why would you say that?
You brought up a subject. I contributed an interesting fact on that subject.
It's called the art of conversation. Okay, your turn. That was a huge spoiler. Good. What is wrong with you? If I did that, you'd bitch about it for weeks.
Oh, really, Leonard? Are you going to have another one of your hissy fits?
Hissy fits? I have hissy fits?
Yes, and I have a theory why. Because of your lactose intolerance, you switched over to soy milk. Soy contains estrogen-mimicking compounds. I think your morning Cocoa Puffs are turning you into a hysterical woman.
You are unbelievable. I don't know why I put up with you. You're controlling, you're irritating.
There you go again. Nag. You're only proving my point, little lady.
You know what? Screw you, Sheldon. You're the most annoying person I've ever met.
Well, I'm annoying. You criticize my behavior all the time. Sheldon, don't talk about your bowel movements over breakfast. Sheldon, when the president of the university is giving a eulogy at a funeral, don't yawn and point at your watch. Sheldon, don't throw away my shirts because you think they're ugly. You're impossible.
That's it. I don't have to put up with this.
Actually, I have your signature on a roommate agreement that says you do.
Here's what I think of your roommate agreement.
Okay, so let's kind of decipher some of these functions. What was the function of Sheldon's behavior? It was to show that he knows so much, right? That's kind of his thing. What was the functions of Leonard's behaviors? To get Sheldon to shut up, so it was to obtain peace, right? So we can look at this and we start looking at these behaviors and identify functions to help us to intervene. If they're wanting to escape an activity, we need to help them see that by doing the activity, they can escape doing more work. So there's things that we can do, and we'll talk about those next week as we get through some stuff. But that's the piece on that. Okay. The next foundation stone is that environments impact behavior, and behavior impacts environments. If a child doesn't like math, is their behavior going to be appropriate, engaged in the classroom for math? Or are they going to be kind of like, oh, yeah, I don't want to be here, those kind of things. That's so that environment can have an impact on the behavior. And behaviors can impact environments. I mean, you see it all the time at Walmart, don't you? Kids crying and screaming at their parents and stuff. That's an environment. And sometimes it's me crying and screaming in my wife's bed. There you go. But we do that all the time. So environments have an impact on behavior and vice versa. As I've mentioned several times, skills deficits impact problem. If you have a skills deficit, then you won't be able to engage appropriately with that skill. You need to teach the skill. And Sheldon has a lot of problems with social skills, understanding social rules, and those kind of things. So you've got to teach them. You don't like it, but you've got to teach them. You need to, behavior management is never done in isolation because people see things differently. It's like the blind man and the elephant. Have you heard that story before? There are 10 blind men, and they were brought to an elephant, and they were to feel the elephant and describe what an elephant feels like. And one blind man says he's a wall. One says he's a snake. One says he's a pillar. One says he's like a lake. Are they wrong? But from their experience, that's what an elephant would look like. But you put them all together, and you got an elephant, right? That's the same thing, is that we see one piece. Still, with a team, we see the whole picture. So it's important to have a team. And the best behavior management tool that you can have is a relationship with a child. Kids will engage with you more appropriately if they have a positive relationship. So that's important. Relationships matter. Okay. Next thing, we'll get into this next thing on Tuesday. I think that we need to, because we're going to start talking about operationally defining things and stuff like that. So we'll go through that on Tuesday. And then look at how we can even do that. Any questions? Any thoughts? Okay. We'll see you guys on Tuesday. Have a very great day. We'll see you guys, virtually Tuesday, and I'll see you face to face on Tuesday, guys. Have a great day.